My parents canceled my engagement party without consulting me because my sis is going through a breakup. 2 weeks ago, my boyfriend of 5 years, Caleb, 27M, proposed to me, 27F, and I said yes. Our families were thrilled, and my parents offered to throw us an engagement party. However, a few days ago, they canceled the party without consulting me because my sister, Penelope, 25F, was going through a breakup. I wouldn't have minded paying for and hosting the party myself, but my parents had promised to handle it. What upset me was that they didn't talk to me before canceling everything. They just called to inform me that Penelope and her boyfriend had broken up, and they thought it would be best to avoid discussing the wedding around her until she was in another relationship because she was devastated. As a result, they decided not to host the engagement party, which was supposed to happen yesterday. The invitations had already gone out a week before, and none of it ended up happening. Penelope and her boyfriend had only been dating for 8 months, so while she was serious about him, I didn't think it was my fault that he wasn't. The reason they broke up was that Penelope asked him if he planned on getting married after learning about my engagement. He felt pressured and asked her to slow down, but she didn't listen, leading to their breakup. It seemed unfair for our parents to cancel my engagement party over this. When I told my parents that what they did was unfair, they got mad, and we argued. Since then, we haven't spoken. I had to email everyone on the guest list myself, explaining that the party was postponed indefinitely because I still planned to have it, just not when or how. There was one person we all missed inviting, my aunt, my dad's older sister. She lives off the grid, with no social media, and only uses email for work. Usually, we'd mail her an invitation and call to confirm. But after the fight, both my parents and I forgot to disinvite her. She ended up showing up at my parents' house yesterday, which was bad news for them because she's quite strict and controls a large inheritance that my dad has been hoping to receive. My father, 51M, is the youngest of 3 siblings. My aunt, 62F, being the oldest, and their middle brother passed away a few years ago. My aunt has always been supportive of my dad, stepping in to care for him since their parents were older and couldn't give him the attention he needed. Despite never marrying or having her own family, she made a lot of money and runs her own business, so my dad expected to inherit everything. However, everything changed after she found out about the canceled party. When my aunt showed up, my parents expected her to understand their reasons, but instead she called them out for treating me poorly. She then came to my place, where I welcomed her warmly. Even though we don't talk often, we get along well. I hadn't planned on telling her about the fallout with my parents, but she brought it up and advised me not to invite them to any wedding events since they clearly didn't respect me. I was shocked because I'd always seen her getting along with my dad, but she seemed very upset. She explained that as the oldest sibling, she had sacrificed a lot for her brothers, and her parents never appreciated it, believing it was her duty to put her brothers before herself. Now she regrets not taking time for herself because she realized that my dad never reached out to her unless he needed something. She told me not to make the same mistakes, warning that once you start forgiving family members for mistreating you, they take advantage of it. I really felt what she was saying because I was about to do the same thing. Let my parents off the hook and invite them to the wedding despite their behavior. But after that conversation, I decided to take her advice. I thought that by the time my wedding came around, I would have made things right with my family, either through their apology or by letting it go. But I realized that I wasn't okay with how they treated me, and I needed them to acknowledge and apologize for it. After my aunt's visit, I messaged my parents and Penelope, telling them that until they acknowledged and apologized for their behavior, I didn't want them involved in my wedding. This morning, I told my aunt I'd set a boundary, and she was proud of me. She stayed the night, and we talked in person before she left. She was disappointed that my dad didn't bother to call her to make amends. Later, my dad showed up at my door, asking if my aunt was still there. I told him she'd left in the morning and was disappointed he hadn't called. He then started screaming at me, blaming me for turning his sister against him because she had called him and said that, given his recent behavior, she had decided to leave everything to me instead of him. This was a huge deal because her inheritance is substantial, and my dad always expected it to come to him. Now, he was disappointed because of his own behavior. I told him he had no right to yell at me, especially when it was his own actions that led to this situation. If he'd just had the decency to speak to his sister after she left last night, maybe things would have been different. But he couldn't even do that much. The only reason he came to my house was because my aunt had cut him out of her will, not because he cared about her as a person. I told him he deserved this, and for years everyone had noticed that it was always she who tried to keep in touch with him while he barely cared about her. So he had no right to complain or try to make me the bad guy here. I didn't have to say anything to my aunt to turn her against them. She was already upset with them when she came by. In fact, it was she who told me not to have any ties with them until they apologized. My father seemed surprised when I told him this and initially accused me of lying because it was hard for him to believe that his dear sister would ever say anything against him. But he had screwed things up with his behavior, so I had nothing else to say to him. I told him to leave, but instead he started crying at my doorstep, saying I had turned the only family he had against him. He said what he did with canceling the party wasn't as bad as what I had done, and that if my aunt seemed upset with him, I should have contacted him to sort things out as a family. I had never heard my father cry like that, and I haven't been able to get it out of my head, even though he left after a few minutes. Now I feel guilty because I think a lot of problems could have been solved if I had contacted him last evening, and we all sat down together as a family to clear the air. But instead, I just vented to my aunt. I guess that made us both bitter, but I still don't see anything wrong with what I did, though I do feel guilty. Caleb doesn't think we did anything wrong, but I still want a second opinion. AETA for not calling my father over to sort things out with my aunt. Edit. My parents haven't always had a favorite, and they were different up until a few years ago. Growing up, my sister and I were always treated equally, and Penelope didn't get preferential treatment just because she was younger. It's only recently that things started changing. I was scared of giving up on my parents so quickly because I thought it was just a phase, and they'd go back to treating us normally again. Now, that seems unlikely. If I had to pinpoint when things started changing, it was around the time Penelope graduated from college. Due to COVID, she couldn't get a job and was depressed for a year, sometimes unable to get out of bed. She was living with our parents while I was with my boyfriend. Because of quarantine, we couldn't see each other often and had to stick to video calls. I think this made my parents softer towards Penelope, forgetting that they have two daughters who need them equally. My relationship with Penelope has also been affected. She started thinking she's more important than me because our parents treat her that way. Earlier, we had a normal sibling relationship with a bit of rivalry, but nothing out of hand. Recently, she's become more of a brat, which is upsetting. I've managed to ignore this change for the past couple of years, but now I don't think I can. Update 1. Thanks to everyone for the comments and advice. I've decided that I don't need to get in touch with my dad or apologize. I don't know why he thinks I owed it to him to contact him when my aunt came over. He had the opportunity to make things right himself before she came to my place, but he chose not to and stuck to his belief that what he did was justified. So for him to blame me now is ridiculous. It's been a couple of days, and now both my parents and Penelope are accusing me of sabotaging his relationship with his sister on purpose and brainwashing her against him. Luckily, they haven't shown up at my doorstep yet, but I doubt that will last. It's upsetting because my dad knows the truth, and he knows I didn't turn my aunt against them. She was already upset with them when she came over and told him it was his behavior that upset her. Still, they're trying to make this about me and paint me as the bad guy seeking revenge. I've blocked them, but they still find ways to annoy me through burner phones and social media accounts. Caleb thinks they're not worth our time, and I think I agree. For years, they've ignored everything good I've done for them, but the second I follow my aunt's advice and set a boundary, suddenly they want to talk and make things about themselves. They never cared about me, And Caleb thinks I should focus on my wedding now and plan everything with my aunt, who's more family to me than they've ever been.